we've talked for 50 minutes here. We've barely scratched the surface of Lacan. We've had a nice debate. I've gotten my point of view across multiple times. I should now let you two talk more, and I will in the second half of this conversation, which will continue now for Twitch people and people who are watching this on YouTube. Go to Twitch, follow us there. If you love Minecraft, you'll love Pop the Left, and you'll love our Twitch stream. But if you're not, you can go to Patreon and watch the second half.
This is pop. Yeah, yeah. This is pop.
All right. So welcome to another Pop the Left. We're streaming this live right now. I'm going to tweet this out to everybody that let people know that we are live with Andreas Wintersperger and Stefan Hain from Austria and Germany. This week we're going to be talking about Lacan again, Andrew Collier's 1980 essay, Lacan, Psychoanalysis, and the Left, I believe is the name of the piece. And I wanted to say, when I read this piece, I really thought it did a very fair job. I mean, I'm not sure I agree with every aspect of it, but it did a fair job of outlining some objections and also just explaining the history of Lacan on the left and also the ideas of Lacan. So I guess what I'll start by doing is asking you both, as I tweet, to kind of summarize what you think the article is about, or the essay says, or what strikes you the most profoundly about it, and then I'll jump in if there's anything you guys left out. So, Andreas, why don't you go first?
Sure. When I first read the article, it was in a preparation for a teaching Stefan Hain and I gave in German on psychoanalysis and the left. And I think what struck me most was this one quote by Trotsky that Collier brings. And I think I was completely ignorant to the relationship or to what Trotsky thought of psychoanalysis before that. And I think this also is good to highlight or bring out the deeper theoretical differences between Freudian thought and Lacanian thought. In a way, how is it that a Marxist revolutionary like Trotsky, and in that specific time, I think it was in the late 20s, when the text was written that Collier is quoting, can see this potential in, I don't know what's the exact word, the willpower of, the human species to enter into the depths of the unconscious as something, as a task or a project, for humanity to master one's own instincts. And that idea, I think, that's to me that seemed very interesting, right? But it also poses a very sharp distinction to the way how Lacan tries to bring the ego and the superego together, right? Because in a way you could say that what Trotsky sees here as the possibility, which is, of course, one has to add not just the possibility of psychoanalysis, but psychoanalysis in, let's say, maybe during the dictatorship of the proletariat. But what Trotsky sees here as a possibility, that seems to be the problem, actually, for Lacan, in a way, right? To open up more and more areas for the ego, so to speak, for the illusion of the subject to conquer, is just a recreation, or I would say, the problem stays the same, right? It's part of the problem that the ego wants to do that. Mm. And I think this to me brought out I would say on a theoretical level, the historical, I want to say, potentials, or how Lacan is treating, the historical potential of psychoanalysis as a means of production, whereas how Lacan is treating it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think like this,
I want to come back to this claim that psychoanalysis was a means of production, because this is something that was a sticking point last time we spoke for me, but we'll come back to it. Stefan, what did you think? How would you summarize the major claims of Andrew Collier's piece?
Yeah, I think it's a great text because it really deals with what the title is in an appropriate way. It's about psychoanalysis. What is psychoanalysis? How did it come up? How was it produced in society? What did the inventor, discoverer of psychoanalysis, Freud himself, think he was doing? How did he think as a science it was figuring into what science and society and psychology have been already? And then he deals with how Lacan is dealing with psychoanalysis, trying to continue it, but as Collier argues, fundamentally transforming it and making it into something really not psychoanalytic. And then the last point, what is the relationship of this turn from Freud to Lacan? What does it mean for the left? Why should the left care about either psychoanalysis or Lacan? And Collier in this text tries to point out in how for Lacan is used as an enabler to escape politics, right? Like a transition of the blues of the post-New Left into the post-political landscape of the 1980s. And this is why I think the essay is just great. I mean, for such a short essay, it really gets to some major points which are not like an explanation of everything, but a good point of departure for trying to think about what role Lacan played in the treatment of psychoanalysis on the left, but also broader in how far Lacan stands in for a certain tendency of his own time, mostly like the post-World War II capitalist society and its struggle to make sense of subjectivity, the tension between the individual and society, but also how is objectivity constituted and what are limits to changing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the strongest argument that I recall from the piece is it has to do with the way in which Lacan took up structuralism as a way to understand consciousness and the unconscious, and some of the weaknesses that I think are in Lacan derived from that move. We talked about it last week or last time we spoke about how structuralism assumes that a kind of a Kantian perspective that we have no access to the world of objects. We have no access to the world. I'm going to put myself here. We have no access to the world of objects. We have no access to the noumenal realm, to material reality, but rather are operating within only the field of perception, which is defined by categories of perception. And then in structuralism, it would be the categories of linguistics, the way that meaning arises negatively through signification, and that we are reduced to trying to understand the realm of human consciousness on its own rather than understand human consciousness in the context of a material universe to which we can access. So that is in section. Let's see, where does that come up in the text on Andrew Collier? But it's pretty early on. It's Lacan's version of psychoanalysis. The unconscious is structured like a language is the section that I'm thinking of, I think. So there's a way in which Lacan is fundamentally idealist as he operates. And one of the things that I am pushing back against with you, Andreas, is what I perceive to be this sort of idealist ideological turn in your own thinking, where you would call psychoanalysis a means of production. And because it seems like what's being produced in psychoanalysis when it's functioning is clearing away of ideologies and the ability for us to be critical and think. But it doesn't in itself, that doesn't necessarily change the way in which we create and recreate or reproduce our world, which is what the means of production is about. That it's really should
I
be called the means
disagree
of
with
production.
almost everything you just said.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
same. Like
Great.
there's a bunch to
Perfect.
unwrap here.
Okay.
I mean, maybe let's start with this means of production thing, because that came up, in our last discussion. And the point about calling it means of production is by no means that it is in any way, that the point about calling it a means of production is that it is, it helps us clearing away obstacles in that sense. It's not like
I know, that's why I disagree with you. I mean, you
all
say
right,
it's
okay,
not right. Okay, I think that that the point of psychoanalysis is to clear away the unconscious presumptions that we have, obstacles for our own activity in thought. And you're claiming that it's something more than that, and I don't see how it could be as an ideological project. So now that's to clarify that.
Okay, well, first of all, again, I think means of production are not just like, factories that produce goods we use for living, but it's the general social intellect, right? So as that, I think like the technique of psychoanalysis is an immensely strong means of production. When you look at, I brought this point in our last conversation. When you look at how it was used, especially in the second half of the 20th century, you can, take, for example, focus groups, right? That seem to determine like whole policy decisions, especially in the 90s by Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. Like it is insane in what way psychoanalytic, quote unquote, thought, has shaped, so to speak, certain aspects of our reality. And by that, it is an immensely strong force or means.
Can we be concrete? How is psychoanalysis shaped? In what realm has psychoanalysis shaped production? The means of production.
First thing is culture industry, obviously, in all of its parts. The other big part would, of course, be advertisement. But also, Adam Curtis mentions this in The Century of the Self. Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, was not only one of the first inventors of like mass advertisement for, it was at the stage when capitalism started to mass produce luxury goods for mass society. And a means of keeping society together through these commodities, instead of going to the crisis of the commodity form itself, as Marxism tried to bring forth in the revolution, was to bring the goods to the people. And with this, the idea arose that you sell products not advertising what they do, what they're good at, but what you could be with them, right? Like you buy this dress, you are going to be this new person. So this is an immense transformation of human society. But also Bernays emulated these ideas to the realm of policies and how to sell policies to people, and invented public relations, which is at the core of capitalist politics in all of our lifetimes. So that's why it's extremely important to see, right, when Trotsky speaks about, because Andreas is quoting Trotsky here, that psychoanalysis is a means of production, right? Like a productive force. It also means that just as any other force of production under capitalism, it's turned into a force of destruction. But it doesn't cease to be a force of production. It reproduces our society, and it reproduces it in this critical, right, like self-undermining way.
Okay. So
it's producing subjectivity, or
okay,
like
let me quote some things from the piece. Trotsky says socialism does not aim at creating a socialist psychology as a prerequisite to socialism, but at creating socialist conditions of life as a prerequisite to socialist psychology. That's in a footnote, number 27. Again, what you had quoted before was that Trotsky, who hoped that under socialism, mankind would be able to raise its instincts to the height of his conscious mind and bring clarity to them, to channel his willpower into his unconscious depths. That is a quote from Trotsky, about about what could be under socialism. That's after, and I'm going to say socialism is not different from communism here. We're not talking about the transitional period, but we're talking about from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Socialism here. Now that's maybe debatable, but nonetheless, that Trotsky is saying that when we have taken charge of the means of production, when the working class has instituted a dictatorship, we will then be able to develop an ideology which could break free of the unconscious and bring and get to the depths of our unconscious mind and replace the symptoms that arise from repressed unconscious desires with our clear ego. That's what Trotsky is saying here. He's not saying that that psychoanalysis. Where is the quote where he says psychoanalysis is a means of production in this piece
I'll
or
have to
anywhere?
look it up. I guess it's in the other text we quoted for the teaching Andreas mentioned. It's in a speech of Trotsky some months before he gets excluded from the Third International. No, from the KPD, as Communist
So
Party, Soviet
because I'd
Union.
be interested to, again, like I'm always suspicious about interpretation here. I mean, he did not say that in this. What was quoted here, in fact, said the opposite.
But that's not
At
the
the bottom,
opposite, Doug.
it is no, it absolutely is the opposite.
Okay.
The socialism does not aim at creating a socialist psychology as a prerequisite to socialism. That is, socialism is a transformation of material relations in society. Ideologies, religions, politics, all of that are produced out of the fundamentals of how we reproduce our lives physically, materially, and socially, politically, but not the other way around.
Okay.
And so that's.
I think I don't know. Maybe I'm completely off here, but I think maybe we can open up this idea of materialism versus idealism. Maybe that's not a good way to think about it,
Yeah,
but I think
because
it looms in the
you can't
background here.
separate them out perfectly, because there is an ideology at work at the point of production. There's a class relation. There's a commodity form. There's the idea that we're creating for equal exchange. All of these are ideological, but they're ideologies put into physical practice to set up the material conditions of our lives. They're not justificatory, they're not justifications for that. They're not religious stories about that. They are actual social relations in production that are ideological, but they're not separate. They're not a movie. They're not a book.
Right.
They're not an expression or justification. They are a way of organizing ourselves socially, which includes our ideas. So now I've had my firm say.
No, but I found that was interesting, right? But when you just formulate it like that, I find I have a hard time why you find it so difficult to think of psychoanalysis as a means of production. You know, like
Because the whether or not you overcome the traumas from your childhood or your relationship with your parents or the unconscious desires that you're not facing does not change whether or not when you go to work, the commodity you will produce will hold labor value and will be put into a market for exchange. It won't change. It may lead you to want to change things that are more fundamental, but on the level of individual psychology, the kinds of things that you're dealing with are not fundamentally these objective ideological forces in production.
Okay. I have a hard time, trying to bring all this together. I would say, when it comes to the whole problem, idealism, materialism, one phrase I always found to be kind of clarifying to get to is that, and I think it's also quoted in the text, like existence determines consciousness, right? I think it's the correct English translation. I hope so.
Yeah.
And I think it is clarifying in a way because it's what is existence. Of course, existence, and I think you would agree with me here, Doug, is not like the physical sense experience of the table or whatever. Like it's not some kind of crude empiricism. It's social existence. So
Right.
social existence in bourgeois society, in the crisis of bourgeois society in capitalism, is a highly mediated phenomenon. It's mediated by basically the whole, the totality. That's the point, right? Like it's mediated by an idea of society that is the society of the third estate, right? That's a bourgeois concept. That there is, something like this. The idea that society is more than the sum of its parts, right? So there is an exceeding factor within, the way how our social existence is mediated. There is this idea, there is the world spirit in Hegel, or in Kant, it's called the Naturabsicht in English. I don't know. It's like, I don't have the term. It's like a
Natural intention or something.
Natural intention of nature or something like that. But the thing is, it's always a concept of people produce a tendency, not by their individual choice, right? But as a society, through the way how they organize their own reproduction, right? This introduces or produces a tendency that goes beyond, right? What we like every individual, every choices we make day by day, right? So, and according to bourgeois society, that tendency we have to grasp as necessarily, how to say that, growing towards freedom, right? Like that's the point. We have to understand in what way we ourselves brought us to this path towards freedom that stands before us as a necessity, as a task we have to understand and to master, right? And this dichotomy, if you will, between, let's say, the individual and the totality, or the individual and society, this way of grasping the mediation and making it productive in a way of transforming society consciously towards freedom. This whole process of mediation grows into crisis in capitalism. So the totality, the whole, in that sense, the tendency is itself self-contradictory as well as the individual.
Why does it go into crisis?
Because of the Industrial Revolution. And that's a good point.
What is it about the Industrial Revolution that puts it into crisis?
Right. I think that brings me to the second part of the formulation by Marx. Like in a way that what stands at the heart of the totality, right? Like the way how we organize our production, our reproduction as a society, it persistently exceeds the way how we are conscious of it, right? Like it exceeds every category we have for making sense of the world in a way. And that poses a task, that contradiction poses the possibility. And it's just, I think the point, or why I want to make that or try to find my way through that, is just by saying that both as well, social existence is mediated by consciousness, as well as consciousness is mediated by social existence. right?
Here's
And
because I want to answer this question I asked you myself now. Why
okay,
does the Industrial Revolution go into crisis? And it's because the crisis, the way to think about the crisis, I think from your perspective, and one that I kind of agree with, is that the crisis is a crisis of freedom, the lack of freedom, the way that freedom is turned into unfreedom. And okay, you can shake your head no, but let me finish. And so then that's the problem. The problem is that the bourgeois society wants to develop freely, it wants to expand human potential. And instead of being able to do that, it has set up a class relation which requires limitations on human freedom, that and that where the decision making about what will be produced is happening behind our back in a way unconsciously. Certainly, workers are not in a position to decide what they're going to produce for what purpose in the totality, and neither are capitalists. So there's that reason why it goes into crisis, because it doesn't achieve its own bourgeois aims. By its own standards, it fails. The other reason why it goes into crisis is because on the level of real wealth, there's a contradiction that arises between the success in the production of real wealth and the success in the production of abstract wealth or money. Those things are at odds with each other. The more successfully that you produce real wealth, the more likelihood you are to go into economic crisis as the money gets devalued. The faster you can produce things, the less they are worth, because of the way exploitation of labor is what sets up value in our society. So it's in both these cases, it's a necessity for a class relationship at the point of production that sets up crisis in society. That's now. Go ahead. You shook your head no. So what do you?
Yeah, and in the end, you brought it up again, right? Like, it's the point of Marxism is that it's not the class conflict that is at the heart of capitalism, but capitalism is its own self-contradiction, and through this produces a class conflict. And when we talk about, right, like the forces of production, what are they? They are means to master nature, to help like humanity, mankind, in its reproduction against the pressure of nature. And of course, nature is
Say
not
that again. What is capitalism? Did you just say what is capitalism? It's a means of mastering nature.
no, the means of production
The means of
are
production.
forces of production are means to the mastery of nature,
Yeah. Okay.
outward as well as inward.
But they're not under capitalism. They're
Yes,
not.
of course they are.
No, not exclusively.
Yes,
That
but
is
no,
not the
but
that is not the case.
that's okay. Allow you should
That, I mean,
possibly understand.
primarily no. Primarily, that is not what is being done. Where the means of production are not scientific. The means of production are aimed at an ideological function, which is the expansion of abstract wealth, not the understanding of the universe, not the expansion of mastery over nature, not the creation of real wealth, but the creation of abstract wealth as of social power to expand the amount of time that the working class is employed.
The
That's
problem
the end of
comes from
capitalism.
pitching them antinomically against each other instead of understanding them as the dialectical, mutually mediated contradiction.
I don't
It
know
is
what that
not,
means.
it is
Tell me
not
what that means.
possible to sort the good and the bad capitalism, like good ideology-free science and ideological things about humans, or like your mommy or your daddy. Like, this
Uh-huh.
is also a super vulgar version of what Freud was attempting to. Freud was trying to give expression to bourgeois society entering into a crisis, but also understanding a struggle which had been part of humanity all along since the inception of culture. And through this was trying to understand what parts of repression are in fact ideological in a certain way, so to speak. Of course, he wouldn't use this language,
Right.
but this is where, right, like, society reproduces itself, and society entered into a crisis in the early 20th century, right? Like, the crisis which had started in the 19th century came to itself, the crisis of civilization itself. And it produced pathologies. And capitalism is still freedom, after all. It is unfree freedom, but it's still true, real freedom. There is no other freedom which is not like idealist, abstract, in the worst way, right? Like in a pejorative way. Not in this.
Well, now, okay, so you're saying are you saying there can be no other freedom, or that there is no other freedom?
There is no other freedom, of course.
Yeah.
But psychoanalysis was a means to develop freedom within the crisis in which society had entered. And since Marxism was the critique of capitalism, it meant not only to point out what is ideological about something, but also in how far something points beyond itself. And Trotsky, in understanding that the revolution was a real possibility, tried to point out in how far it's not like when we deal with questions of psychology, it's not a question of like ideology. Do we need bourgeois ideology or do we need socialist ideology? But understood the question which modern psychology faced as one of science, one of the question of enlightenment from like the restrictions of nature, which are posed upon us and keep being reimposed on us by society itself. Because society, nature-like, kept reproducing itself and could not make this leap out of the circles, the limitations of capitalism. That's what Marx says needed the revolutionary action of the proletariat. But it's still something which happens inside capitalism, and therefore all of capitalism would be needed to put to use in a socialism. And what else could it be than something which, at the given current state, aids the production and reproduction of society, even though the aims are blind, right? Even though we don't really see why we are doing it, it still is the free production of society, at least if Marxism is right.
Okay. All right. Here's what I want to do. I want to try to see if I can restate your arguments, and you can tell me if I'm getting it right. Okay. And I just state your position as I understand it. So your position is that that bourgeois society itself it goes into crisis. It generates its own contradiction. That it is a kind of free society, but that it because of the Industrial Revolution, it has turned against itself, and the reason why it's done that is because the working class has yet to unify and take charge of itself as workers to realize the freedom of the bourgeois society. I'm doing my very best because you said quite a lot. Am I leaving something important out, or am I getting close?
No, it was very good. There was one point missing, and I did not entertain it this time. But this is right. It's the very basic Marxist point that the contradiction of society is that you got bourgeois relations, right? So I can sell my labor, and I'm going to live from it, and I'm going to contribute to society's wealth. But through the Industrial Revolution, through machine work, something appears which can substitute for human labor on the basis of reproduction of everyday life in a equal and better way. So a lot of labor is not needed anymore and can be taken over by machines. But society could not adjust in its own political self-understanding of what this meant. Basically, that these relations of production, the bourgeois relations for production, which should not only give you a job, but freedom, right? Like freedom to be yourself as well as part of society, could not be superseded. And because it couldn't be superseded in the 19th century, the proletariat arises as a class which, to realize its interest within the system, has to abolish the system as a whole, and through that, class relations. But it's this fundamental contradiction between bourgeois relations of production and industrial forces of production, which caused the crisis of capitalism, which means, right, like as Horkheimer later puts it, not work is made superfluous, but the workers.
So why is it that why is it that the bourgeois relations led to the development of automation, which then set up this problem in society? What was it about bourgeois society itself that, like, the real simple question? You can get a machine to make things for you. You don't have to employ people to create, let's say, carrot sticks. You can have a machine do it for you, and the machine can even pick the carrots and plant them. So why can't we just take those carrots, and consume them as we need to in order to live our lives freely? Why is it that the development of a machine to plant and pick and package and distribute carrot sticks leads to a problem, and the development of a proletariat?
Because this way of freedom in which we would want to live with the carrot stick machine is a freedom which presupposes that everyone relates to everyone else through work.
Right.
Through the concrete form of labor. But if you make the machine central, you need to substitute something for labor. And Marx's point is you can't just substitute something for labor. You need to work through the contradiction of labor. This is being held back by the impasse of society.
Why can't you just, what is labor? How is labor the basis of our social interactions?
Because it's what connects everyone. It's the real
how does it connect it? Through what mechanism?
It produces and reproduces society on a global level.
How? Through what mechanism?
Through all mechanisms known to us.
Through the market.
Yes.
Through the exchange of commodities in the market.
That's one part of it.
But that is how labor specifically sets up the terms of society, through the production and exchange of commodities in the market, and then the financial system that arises on top of that production. But it's through the economy that labor sets up the relations in society. It is not primarily first through our psychological relations or our neighborly relations or the relations that we have with each other in churches or the way we relate to each other around movies. It is through the relationship that we set up through productions of commodities and then the sale of them in the market that labor is central. And why is it central? Because all of society arises out of the way we materially reproduce our lives. So labor is central because of that.
No.
Okay.
Work and keeping yourself alive is necessary for that. But labor is the specific historical form which work took under bourgeois society and then capitalism. But
yeah, it's a specific material form, but not just an ideological form. It is a specific material relation that arose under capitalism after the subsistence farming and work for yourself faded away, and we became interdependent, and we related to each other primarily through the exchange of commodities, social relationships mediated by things. Okay, that's the society we live in now.
Yeah, the relationship between man appears as the relationship between things. That's right.
Yeah, right. That's right. But they actually the fetish nature of the commodity is that they not only appear that way, but they operate that way. That's not the limit of what can be done, but that is how things actually are materially reproduced today. That's how they are distributed. That is a physical fact and fundamental because it's what feeds us. It's what allows us to continue from one day to the next.
But it's not independent from thought.
It's not. But it's not independent from thought, but it is independent from quite a lot of thought. It's independent from religious thought. It's independent from cultural thought. It's independent from theories of psychology, but it's not independent from all thought. It's not independent from the kind of thinking that structures our productive work, and that sets up abstract labor as the value that mediates our exchanges and our production. And this is just straight ahead Capital, Volume 1, Marxism.
So why do you think psychology exists if not to bring order and regulate the labor market?
I think psychology exists the same way that efficiency experts exist, the same way that neoliberal politicians exist, the same way that television preachers exist, which is as a way to ideologically justify what is a fundamental social relationship at the point of production. And it works and it doesn't work. And by the way, we have to assume that some ideological formations will point beyond this productive relation at the center of capitalism, that we can actually think in ways that aren't supportive of that particular. Otherwise, Marx is just another means of reproduction of the system as it is. If we think that everything that exists within bourgeois society is a means of production and reproduction of capitalism, then we cannot think beyond it.
Well, Stefan, do you wanna? I think
You can jump in
honestly,
if you want to.
yeah, I think this is now. Thanks for the last statement, Doug. That brought it for me back to where we were starting from, right? Like psychoanalysis as a means of production. And if I understood you right, like the problem you have with it is that by then saying everything sort of becomes a means of production, and then it's kind of like, right, it's doesn't really matter because we cannot differentiate between the materialistic basis of society and the ideological superstructure.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's
right?
about right. Yeah. We have to make that differentiation, even though, these things are shot through one another. And especially, like the ideology informs how we're going to set up production. The ideology of the tech of Silicon Valley has changed production. It has, but the fundamental aspect of production, which is that abstract labor time sets up commodity exchanges in the market between peoples and between nations, between workers and between capitalists, all of that. That's why labor is central. Labor is more important than any given capitalist, because without labor time, there is no method for distributing goods in the world. There is no method for aiming even at production right now.
Right. So my point was just saying, I don't know how you phrased it just before. You said that, like, if everything becomes a means of production, like we cannot see, there is nothing, that we can see that goes beyond it, right? Like everything is a reproduction of capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, but I think that, Stefan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that gets to an interesting point, because in a way it is, and Marxism is nothing else but the immanent dialectical critique of how everything we have reproduces capitalism, which means like it maybe points to come also back to the text again, to a very interesting quote. I try to find it. It's like where and I think that the thought idea helps us maybe here a bit, that is invoked, that Collier invokes. Wait, I'm so sorry that I haven't. Wait, I'm gonna open it here. So sorry for that. Since we are live, you cannot just cut it out.
Yeah. Well, we're live, but I will cut it out when we go up on YouTube.
All right. So here I have it. Collier says the task of human liberation in all its forms is seen as one of removing restraints placed by existing society on existing possibilities of human development.
Right.
You see? So I think I really like this thought idea, because to come back to what Stefan said, like existing human, possibilities for development, right? So, and to try to relate it with the idea of immanent dialectical critique is trying to, say in what way capitalism fails to reproduce, society, but also in what way it manages it to do it in a free form. And I think it's necessary to understand, and I get like why you want to put labor at the center as a kind of like, the core principle, the core, point where you can, what's the English term for it, where you can put the thing, like Heberpunkt. I don't know, Stefan, maybe you know it.
Labor.
Sublate?
The
Labor.
archimedical, yeah. And I think you have a point in that, but I now I think I also get why you thought that my kind of thinking was idealist, because I think you mean that I'm not talking about labor, right? So this is why I don't see the materialistic, point to change society.
Mhm.
I don't know. I would, even go so far as to say that the contradiction, that the fact that capitalism appears as the contradiction of labor and capital is a historical development, that is not somehow, that cannot be presumed for all eternity. My point is that capitalism appears in crisis in every bourgeois category we have available today, right?
Mhm.
And of course, it's important that for Marxism, we have to note that the proletariat was the subject object of history,
Mhm.
the major political force, the major political symptom that, as Stefan put it, that would abolish that would abolish or overcome the crisis of capitalism together with its own existence. But I still think it's necessary and by no means problematic to say that the crisis of bourgeois society appears in psychoanalysis as a means of production. I don't see why that is idealistic in a way, or maybe you can.
Okay, the crisis of bourgeois society appears in psychology as a means of crisis of the means of production.
In
Okay,
psychoanalysis.
right. Okay, in psychoanalysis. Well, I mean, look, if you say psychoanalysis is a means of production, then
That's what I always said.
it is. If you say that, then like, would the efficiency expert that goes into the factory to be a means of production? And would we want to seize him? I mean, maybe so, maybe so. Maybe we would want to seize the tailorist who would go into American factories and modify the way production was being done in order to maximize basically the number of commodities that could be produced in an hour. So maybe that is a means of production. I think that we probably if workers were to take control of the means of production, we might get rid of the efficiency expert. And I also think that to the degree to which psychology is useful in the way that Trotsky talked about it, something that we would want to hold on to under socialism, the same way we'd want to hold on to free speech, is that it would allow us to go beyond what is and the kinds of means of production we have now and create something new. In which case, like the reason we're going to seize the means of production materially is to change it in terms of its structuring ideology, to abolish labor as the primary mediating structure of society, and to create something new.
And to realize it.
Well, to realize real physical work, including the general intellect, as opposed to being trapped by this ideological abstraction of labor time as a measure that's embodied as a value in commodities and sets of exchange. So that, I mean, anyhow, the point is, I feel like if we want to say that the efficiency experts is a means of production that needs to be seized, I'm okay with that. But I would just say that, we would be misguided if we organize the working classes to seize the clinics, to take over the therapeutic couch as their own, that's just not going to be the means of production that we should be aimed at transforming.
But again, psychoanalysis is not the same as the treatment of psychological pathologies.
No, it's the theory that allows that to happen.
Exactly, but it's only one part of it.
Right. But going back to, okay, listen, we've talked for 50 minutes here. We've barely scratched the surface of Lacan. We've had a nice debate. I've gotten my point of view across multiple times. I should now let you two talk more, and I will in the second half of this conversation, which will continue now for Twitch people and people who are watching this on YouTube. Go to Twitch, follow us there. If you love Minecraft, you'll love Pop the Left, and you'll love our Twitch stream. But if you're not, you can go to Patreon and watch the second half.